Hi, and welcome to this short demo that I'm going to be going through on demonstrating a fairly complex use case, an integration use case, implemented really simply using JBoss Fuse 6.1 and using a splitter aggregate. So my name's Graham Coleman. I'm a middleware solution architect for Red Hat, and I'm going to be running you through this demo using our Fuse 6.1 integration capabilities. Okay. Let me look at the use case of what we're going to demonstrate. So it's a pretty simple use case itself, but the actual integration logic and the complexity of the logic isn't that simple. So what do I want to do? I've got a company that needs to provide some customized stock quotes to customers. Now, the customer will send us a list of companies which they want quoted. We want to then take that list of companies and individually send out a request to get the full stock information for each of those companies. And then when we come back, we collect all of those individual calls and we integrate we aggregate those and send them back as a single result back to the customer. Now, we look at our XML that we're going to send through. It's pretty simple. I'm going to be exposing a REST interface and posting through some XML. I'm going to be sending two company IDs. And I'm going to expect back those aggregated results as a single message. Okay, so let's look at what that route looks like in Camel. So I'm going to be building this route using the Camel capabilities within JBoss Fuse. So let's look at each of the individual aspects of that route. So I'm going to create a REST interface to expose our service to our customers. I'm going to set some headers. And those headers are going to be pulled out of the XML message, which I'm going to use to control the aggregation. I'm going to split the message, so I'm going to take each of those companies that get sent through individually, split them, and call the back-end quote service for each one of those. Here's where I call the back-end quote service. So I'm calling out to another route using a direct call. I'm just going to transform that message, send it onto our back-end web service, and do a bit of transformation to come back. And the final piece, I'm going to aggregate the responses coming back. So in all, it's a fairly simple route. If we look at what this means in terms of the integration aspects of it, it's actually fairly complex. You know, we're splitting some messages, we're sending those messages out individually, and we're aggregating the responses to those messages. So we're not going to do this synchronously. We're going to do this in parallel. So our aggregator has to have some good logic to kind of determine how many messages it's sending out, how many messages it needs to aggregate coming back, what it needs to aggregate on. So it's a fairly complex aggregation. It's not just a synchronous, send two messages and correlate them coming back. So let's get into the Camel aspect of it, and let's show you how this is done. Okay, so I'm going to be using the JBoss Developer Studio. So this is my Camel palette. I've already pre-populated some of this project with a couple of pieces. I'll go through those as we run through the demo. But essentially, I've got a new project which has got a blueprint XML. Now, our blueprint XML is what we build our Camel routes into. So we can define a number of routes in our blueprint XML. And when we open it up in the Developer Studio, we get our palette here. So this is where we can drag and drop our components. On the right-hand side here, we can see we've got a number of things we can choose to drag and drop onto that palette, onto our area. So I've got endpoints which I can drag onto there and use. I've got lots of routing capabilities, aggregators, choice, filters, load balancers. There's a whole load of things which we can choose here. There's some logic pieces in here, so we can have loops and finally catch, our error handling, rollbacks and throttles. There's tons of things in there. We can do lots of transformations. We can transform the headers, the properties, body, enrichments. There's tons of things we can do there. And there's a couple of miscellaneous things here as well for us to play around with. Okay, so let's go back to our route which we're going to implement. Let's look at the first piece here. So we're going to create our REST interface first of all. So this is the bit we're going to expose as an endpoint. Okay, so to do this we need to create an endpoint first of all. And we drag that onto our screen here. And if we click on the Properties tab, we'll see we get some properties to fill in. to fill in to do with that the component that we've selected. So what we're going to be using to expose our REST endpoint is we're going to be using CXF, and we're going to be using the CXF RS component. So if all of our endpoints are defined by this URI. So there are 160 different endpoints we can use. So the first part of our URI on our endpoints define the component that we're using. Now as soon as I type this CXFRS or the component in, we can go to the documentation tab and it'll tell us, give us lots of details of how we use that component, the dependencies, a lot of the properties that we need to set on using that component. Okay, so we're going to be using the CXFRS component, which is going to expose us a REST interface. Now I've already declared a bean, which is a JaxRS bean with some of the annotations on there to define the REST interface. Now that bean is going to be called it's called REST front end with a small r. Now let me show you where I've defined that REST front end. Let me just quickly put a log message on here, and we're going to log out the body of our message. So REST endpoint. So we're going to say the REST endpoint body equals, and we're just going to print out the body when we log it. So if we look at the source tab on here, so everything we do within the palette gets rewritten as the source here. Now the piece we're interested in is our root that we've just built here. So ignore these other roots for now, because these ones are pre-populated for brevity of this demo. So this is the main root which we've just created. Now I've just done a from, which is the endpoint which I've just dragged into it, and I'm using CXFRS. I'm using a bean. Now I need to have declared that bean somewhere in this XML. So here's the bean that I've declared. It's a CXFRS server bean, and it's got an address. This is the address we're going to be exposing to call the service, and it's got a service class. So our service class is called getQuoteResource. Okay, so let's take a quick look at getQuoteResource and just show you what that is. So if we look down the left hand side here, I've created a JaxRS bean. It's nothing spectacular, it's just defining a REST component interface. So it's got a path. It's expecting to take something from a post request on this path, getQuote, and it's going to produce some JSON output. You'll notice that we're returning null. We're not actually doing any implementation in this class. This is just to define the interface for our REST service endpoint. Okay, so let's go back to our design. So I've created my CXFRS bean, and I'm going to log it out. So let's just quickly test that. Okay, so to run our Camel routes, what we can do is we can run the Camel route internally within our IDE here. If I do a right click on the Camel XML, I can do a run as, and I can run as a local Camel context. You'll notice that we've got context and context without tests. We can actually include our JUnit tests to test our route. But what I'm going to do here is I'm not going to write any tests. I'm going to be a bad developer, and I'm just going to run it without any tests. Right, once I've clicked on there, we'll see our route is starting up inside the IDE. Great, it's already started. There you go, started in 5.5 seconds. Now, let me start up a Postman session in Chrome. So Postman is just it'll enable us to send some REST messages through. So here's my REST message which I'm going to send through. I'm going to send my Oracle and Red Hat quotes through to this endpoint address here. Let me change that to localhost. So it's going to come through to my local local laptop. Okay, now I can just send this message through, and what I'm expecting to see in the output is it printing the body of this message that's just come through. So let's take a look. Yeah, here we go, we've received it. My REST endpoint body equals, and it's just the XML which we've sent through. Great. Okay, so if we look back at our route that we're building, that's just the first part here. Now, we've created the REST interface. That's exposed to our outside world. We can call into our route. Now I just want to set a couple of headers. Now the headers I'm going to set, I've already created the route for this. So if I look at my outline, I've got a set headers route here which I'm going to call into. Let's just take, I'll show you that route because it's nothing special. I'm just pulling some headers from the message that we're sending through, and if you notice, I'm creating a new header called num orders, and I'm using an expression. So I'm going to be taking the body of the message that this route receives, and I'm going to be using XPath to pull out /quote /at the attribute num orders. So if we look at our previous slide here, so here's I'm specifying num orders and order ID as two attributes to the quote message. So this is what we're going to be working on, and pulling some headers out of there just to set them. If I look at the other one, I'm pulling out the order ID, which is here. So I'm going to set them into the header of the message, and we're going to work on those as part of the aggregator. Okay, so let me show you how to call that set headers. If we look at the set headers start, we're using a direct URI. Now direct is really a way of us being able to call another route from within our own JVM, within our own Camel context. So I can call through to another route. I can use the direct URI, and that's just going to enable me to link from my main route through to my other set headers route. Now I've got two options for doing that. I can use either direct, or there's another URI called SADA. So direct will do us a synchronous, so request response call to another route, or we can use SADA, which will give us an asynchronous calling pattern to call another route. Okay, so let's just call that route. So I'm going to create another endpoint. I'm going to wire it up after my log message, and I'm just going to copy that direct URI set headers. There's a capital H. So that's going to call out, set some headers, and then it's going to return back with the message with those headers set. Great. Okay. So I'm setting some headers. Next, getting through to the interesting bit, I want to split a message now. So let me split that message. So we said we were going to split it based on the company. So if we look at the XML message, so I'm getting two companies coming through here. So I'm going to use a piece of XPath to grab the quote company and split it by that. So let's look at our routing options. Now we've got a split here, which is quite handy. We can split our message based on that. Okay, let's look at the properties for the split. So I've got some expressions here. Now the split it's going to be acting on the message coming in, and that's that piece of XML. Now I need to tell the split component how to split the message. And I've got a number of options to use expressions. There's tons of things I can use to create that expression. I can use JavaScript, expression languages, constants, PHP. But what I'm going to be doing here, because I'm just using XML, I'm just going to grab some XPath, use an XPath expression, and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to split it based on quote / company. And that's it. So that's going to take my message and split it and send out, continuing down this route to the messages that it splits. And I can do them sequentially, or I can do them in parallel. So I'm going to choose to do them on parallel because I want them to work, use all of the compute power that I've got to process these messages in parallel. There's a whole load of things we can do when we're splitting. There's things like timeouts and aggregation strategies on the split. but let me just split it for now, and let us log out. Let's put a log in there, and we can log out some details of the split, so we can see them both coming through separately. So let's log split message equals, and I'm just going to log out the body again. Okay, so let's just save that and run it. So we're going to run as local camel contacts without tests, and let's wait for that to start up, and we can go back to our Chrome and fire that same message through again. Okay, so given ourselves an error. I think, let me stop this and go back to our split. I want to take that off. It's silly of me to put that on there. So let's run it again. So that's the power of having the Camel process run within our IDE. I can just quickly stop, start, run, test, which is great. You know, I've just started it up again. I found out what the error was. Let me send it through, and there we go. We've got our message coming through. So there's the original message come through from our log, and we've got a split here. So we split the message. We've got our first company come out, and we've got another info log message saying the other split. So we've got Oracle popping out. There you go. So that's all we've done. We've taken the message, we've set some headers, we're splitting it up into the two companies that are coming in. Okay. So let's look at, so we've done the split. The next thing what we want to do is for each of those split messages we want to post out to an external service to say, give me some stock quote information about that company. Now, again, I've already pre-created the route, so let me show you the route which is going to handle calling out to the external service, and I've called it service proxy. So I've got again a direct endpoint, and that's called service proxy, so that's what I'm going to use to call into this route. I'm going to take that company and I'm going to pull the company ID out of it and transform it into a SOAP message. I'm just going to transform it into using XSLT. So I'm going to use the XSLT component, and I'm going to use this XSLT file stored in here. So if I look at my resources, I've got XSL quote.xsl. Now this is a fairly simple. There we go. So this is a fairly simple XSLT file. I'm just actually, pretty well just banging in a SOAP envelope and pulling out the company ID to put into the web symbol part of that SOAP envelope. I wouldn't normally do this. I normally use CXF to do this, but in the sake of brevity, I'm showing you some of the transformations you can do to call out to an HTTP endpoint. So this is just going to call out to an HTTP endpoint, and it's going to fire out a SOAP envelope into that HTTP endpoint. Okay. I'm then going to use this reference URI to do a call quote web service. Now if I look back to my source and see what that reference looks like, so here I'm creating an endpoint reference and calling it call quote web service. And if we look at the URI I'm going to a web service called webservicex.net. Now you may have heard of webservicex.net. It's pretty useful website which just gives you a number of just test web services where you can fire off either SOAP or REST messages and get back something. So I can fire off my Red Hat quote request, and it's going to send me back some details about our Red Hat stock, which is doing pretty well at the moment. Okay, so that's what I'm going to call. So let me go back to our route. So I'm going to call that reference web service, and then at the end of this part of the route, I'm just going to pull the SOAP envelope apart and just grab the body of the the response coming back. So let's go back to our main route. I want to call that route that we've just seen. So let's add it onto the end of our list of things. So I'm going to call direct service proxy. So we're going to call that route, the one which is just calling out to the external web service. And let me log that again as well. So I'm just going to log, and again let me log result from the external service equals. Now I'm going to expect to see a fully populated quote coming back when I log this. Okay, so let's give it a go. Run as context. Let's see that fire up. Go back to our Chrome. Yeah, we're still starting. Okay, we've just started the routes. Let's fire it through. So let's look at our console. What have we got? So here's the original message. We've split the message here and split it again. And here's the result from our external service call for each of those split messages. Yeah, so we've got our Red Hat and Oracle, and there we go. We've got the fully populated quote information in there. Great. So let's go back to our slide. So this part is what we've just done. So we created a direct another route called direct service proxy, called out to an external web service, which is sending some results back. Now the last thing we need to do, we want to aggregate all the results coming back. Now this is the really clever part. I mean, this is so simple in Camel, but it's actually doing some fairly complex stuff under the covers. Okay, let's go back to the route and see how we're going to implement this. In parallel, we split these orders. What we've done, we've taken them, we've sent them through to the direct service proxy, so we've called out to the web service. What we want to do next is we actually want to aggregate all of the orders that we sent out back together. So let's look at what we can use. I think we can use an aggregator. So let's take the aggregator component and let's wire it up into our route. So from the end of the log there, I'm going to go into our aggregator and let's look at the properties which we've got available for our aggregator. Okay, so there's some key properties which we need to set to be able to get our aggregator to work. Now the first one of these is the correlation expression. Now we need to tell our aggregator what messages it needs to aggregate together. Now we can select these based on an expression. So if you remember, we pulled out the order ID from the headers of the message when it was coming in and set it into a header for our Camel, for our route to use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the header. I'm going to grab a header from our message and I'm going to use that as our expression. So I've got order ID. So what that's saying is that for every message with the same order ID that comes through into our aggregator, we're going to use it and aggregate it. Now the next thing we need to set is to tell the aggregator when to stop aggregating. So there's a few things we can do. One of the things we can do is use an completion size expression, and that's basically going to tell the aggregator that after it's received X amount of messages to stop aggregating and send the result. Or we can use a time-based expression, so we can say after X amount of seconds, milliseconds, we can stop the aggregation and send out the result. The third thing we can use is a predicate, so we can use a completion predicate based on any expression. So that expression could be anything. We can make it up from the message, we can make it up from time, we can go to an external service. We've got something we can put in there to tell the aggregator that now is the time to stop and to put all those messages together to return. So if you remember, we pulled out again into the header earlier in our route, we pulled out a thing called num orders. Now our customer was very smart and he sent through an integer telling us how many orders we're expecting in the message. So we're expecting 2 orders, so we're just telling the aggregator that after 2 orders, stop aggregating and return the result. Okay, The third thing we need to set is our strategy ref. Now our strategy ref is the how part of the aggregator. So these top bits are what to aggregate. This part is how to aggregate. And we aggregate using a Java bean. And then the Java bean is the thing that tells us how it's going to aggregate our messages. So I've already created a bean here, the aggregate orders bean. So let's look at the bean here. So for every time a message comes into the aggregator, it calls this class to aggregate. I have a class, it implements the aggregation strategy from the Camel libraries. Aggregation strategy has a single method called Aggregate, which takes two exchanges, an old exchange and a new exchange. Now an exchange is the package that holds the message from the root. So when we first come into our aggregator looks at the exchange, the new exchange that is coming in, and it decides on how to what it needs to do to add that and aggregate it into its final message. So the first run through is going to come through and say, okay, I haven't actually aggregated anything before, so I've got nothing to aggregate this message again. So just old exchange equals null and return the new exchange. When we return the exchange, that then goes into the old exchange coming in with the next message. So on my second message, I'm going to come into aggregate. The old exchange would be the previous message, which didn't actually do anything to aggregate, and I'm going to get through the next message. Now, what I want to do in my aggregator, I'm just telling it to add the two messages together, so I'm just appending one message to another. So I'm opening up the old exchange, getting hold of the body, opening up the new exchange, getting hold of the body, and then I'm just adding them together, saying old plus new and returning it as the new exchange. And it's as simple as that. I mean, you can put as much complexity as you like into the aggregator, but this is pretty simple. It's just appending messages together. Okay, let's go back to our root then. So we've aggregated. Now let's just log out the aggregated message at the end. So I'm choosing a log. Let's do it this way, to add endpoint log. And I'm just going to log out aggregated message equals. I'm just going to log out the body again. So body. Now if I just quickly look at one other thing I need to do is on my splitter I also need to tell it that it's going to be using that aggregation strategy. So it's already there, aggregate orders being good. I just need to look at the source of this for a second, because it's actually putting in some other configuration parameters which I haven't used, so I'm just going to get rid of those. There's another one here. Great, so I'll just get rid of those and let's give it a whirl. Let's try and run it. So run as, let's see our root starting up. Hopefully it's going to start up without any errors. Great, it's started. And go back to our Chrome. Let's send through our message, and there we go. So let's take a look at what we've done. Here is our original message coming through. It's our original quote message. We've taken that message, we've split it into two. We've got two quotes that we're going to send through. Here's where we've gone through to the external service. Here's our Red Hat service call, and here's our Oracle service call. And finally, we've taken them and we've aggregated them together to form one long stock quote return. So I've got our Red Hat piece here, and what we should see is it's just added onto the end of that message an Oracle quote as well. And there we go. That's what we'll send back. So that's essentially all of the demonstration I wanted to show you. So if we go back and look at our slide, let's see what we've done. What we've actually done is a pretty complex piece of integration, but done it really simply. So we've exposed a REST interface, exposed it to the outside world using a pretty simple JAX-RS annotated Bing. We've pulled out some data from that the message that's coming in and we're storing it for using later. We've actually split the message. We're using some XPath query to split the message and process each of those parts of the message in parallel. We've called for each of those splitted message. We've called out to another route, which is doing some transformation. I'm transforming that body into the SOAP call, calling out to the SOAP service, and then I'm transforming again on the way back just to pull the body out. And then finally, for each time we've done that, we're pushing that into an aggregator, and the aggregator is going to keep hold of all of those messages until it's been told when to stop. And then once it's stopped, it's going to fire that aggregated message back. Now that's pretty good, actually. If you think of to do this in a computer language like Java, you think of how difficult it would be to do all of those pieces and the things you need to consider to do this type of integration. And look at what we've done in Camel. So Camel is pretty good. It gives us all of the tools to be able to just configure all of these complex pieces and then deploy it. And once we add Fuse, Red Hat Fuse on top of that, it gives us a whole load more in terms of enterprise capability of deploying this and managing this as a part of an enterprise integration. So that's all I wanted to show you today. I hope it's been useful for you. I'm going to do a few more of these videos concentrating on Red Hat JBoss Fuse. So this was a Camel piece. Join me for the next one. I'm going to be showing you how to build and deploy your JBoss Fuse components into a cloud provider. So my next video is going to be deploying this route into an Amazon Web Services container using Fuse and Fuse Fabric. So thank you for watching and join me later. Thank you.